Hello. Kiki's Delivery Service is a 1989 Studio Ghibli release that, once translated, saw the brilliant voice talents of Kirsten Dunst and the late Phil Hartman bring to life the eponymous character and her moody black cat. Now, I've previously mentioned that many Studio Ghibli films work with very loose plot lines and focus more on internal conflicts rather than overt external adversaries, and Kiki's Delivery Service is a prime example of this. Along with movies such as Whisper of the Heart, Ponyo and Princess Kaguya, this is a coming-of-age tale that sees a young girl leaving the nest and setting out on her own for the first time for a degree of autonomy and self-realisation in the real world. Now, starting with a brief overview of this quite loose story, we see the young Kiki, who is a witch in training, leave her family and her rural home to develop her craft in the big city. And this tale is very much a lighthearted coming-of-age adventure in which Kiki discovers employment, responsibility, love, loneliness and friendship outside of the family unit for the first time. And as the title suggests, Kiki starts a delivery service which pays the rent and helps her develop a degree of responsibility in the world. And we also have a milder subplot which has a touch of romance to it, which is the neighbourhood boy Tombo, who develops affections for her and is consistently attempting to court her for the first time. So, within this quite basic story, the main external obstacles that face Kiki are struggling to deliver a package on time and climactically having to save her love interest Tombo from a crashing Zeppelin. And these, particularly the first one, are hardly the most riveting or complex of storylines and twists, but the beauty of the movie is the emotive transitional qualities that Kiki embodies and how she develops throughout the film and handles these tasks that confront her. The package delivery sequence in particular, where she requires Gigi the cat to pose as a doll while she finds the missing and conveniently identical looking cat doll, is one of the most humorous, aspects of the film, and it exemplifies Kiki's determination and this development of her self-sufficiency and responsibility. This is also a scene that's quite important because it leads Kiki to meet Ursula, who is this hermit-like girl that lives in the forest, and she turns out to be quite a significant secondary character insofar as she is an adult role model for Kiki and a representative of the mature and self-sufficient young woman that Kiki aspires to become. So, the internal and emotional obstacles that confront Kiki are where the real twists of this story come into play. Kiki's journey into the real world is less about confronting danger of an external nature than it is with dealing with the spectrum of human emotions. The fleeting instances we see of her family at the beginning of the film show them to be very warm and comforting and, a conventional nuclear family. And what we see is as soon as Kiki leaves her village, she meets another witch. In fact, the first external character she meets is another witch in the air who, rather than being of a wholesome persuasion like her family, is shown to be a smug, demeaning and hostile kind of witch towards Kiki. And she brags about her powers, she brags about the size of the city where she lives, and she also brags about the clothing that she wears compared to Kiki. And although Kiki kind of reacts with relative naivety towards this, and the fact she's being insulted, this becomes a recurring cause of insecurity for her later in the film. And we find instances where she's looking in shop windows and kind of comparing clothes to what she's wearing, and she also hides from other girls in the town, which arguably contributes to the main crisis of the film, which is this sort of self-esteem issue. Another emotional issue Kiki has is when she helps the elderly woman, Okusama, prepare a pie for her granddaughter. And, Kiki kind of takes this pie, which is, late in being made, and she rushes through the town, through the rain, to deliver this on time, which she succeeds in doing. Only for the granddaughter to open the door and complain that she hates her grandmother's pies. So this level of rudeness, particularly at having witnessed Okusama going to great pains to make this pie, is another tipping point that once more sees Kiki kind of lose a bit of faith and we gradually see her powers, starting to diminish shortly thereafter. So, aside from these interactions and these social events that kind of deter Kiki from, her wholesome, positive experience, there's also feelings of loneliness and anxiety during her journey, exacerbated by the slowness of business with her delivery service, and also seeing established relationships around her, such as Osono the baker and her husband, and also frequent run-ins with Tombo and his entourage of friends, who always seem to be together and having a good time, which of course kind of contrasts starkly with Kiki, who is basically always alone. So all of these factors coalesce, and Kiki finally falls into a depression, leaving her unable to communicate with the increasingly absent cat, Gigi, who it turns out has also partnered up with a neighbourhood cat. And it takes the aforementioned Ursula, who is the kind of mature hermit girl, who reappears at this point, to be a catalyst for Kiki's recovery and, road to a sort of self-realisation, as it were. Again, as I said, it's kind of, this film is quite limited in the external conflicts that take place, and it's much more about these emotional episodes that set the film apart from others in the anime genre, I think, and other films in general. It doesn't require an outward antagonist to propel the plot forward, but rather genuine human emotions and considerations that everyone goes through and can relate to at some point in their life. Dealing with solitude, adapting into adulthood and responsibility is something that, everyone can relate to and, has to go through at some point, whether they like it or not. And exploring it through the upbeat character of Kiki and seeing her come out of the other end is a really heartwarming narrative that exemplifies the Studio Ghibli penchant for strong female characters, I think. So just a final note on these heartwarming aspects. We have these micro interactions, and this is one of the things I really, really like about the Ghibli films. It's these micro interactions, it's these little things that don't contribute to the story. They're just expressions or moments, but they really kind of build the character of this franchise. So, for example, we have the seemingly gruff and alpha male-esque baker, Fukuo, I think his name is, and he only speaks once right at the end of the film. But throughout the film, he comes across as quite a silent, brooding sort of bloke, and we see this one instance of him where there's only Gigi the cat in the room looking at him, and he starts showing off by spinning multiple bread trays at once. And it's just kind of really humorous to see kind of Gigi and him have this moment together where the guy is trying to emote and show off. And of course, it doesn't progress any aspect of the story, but it just provokes a laugh that this big, muscular, silent guy is taking a discreet moment to try and impress a cat. And he is also representative, I think, of the quintessential man, which is to say he is a hulking alpha that Kiki initially finds quite daunting, as seen when she tiptoes to the outhouse in the morning and then hides when he walks past to open the bakery, which is a symptom of her shyness because of him. So, as mentioned in my previous video, Laputa Castle in the Sky, which covers a lot of old versus new themes, Kiki also explores this theme a little bit with the aforementioned example of her character, but also Kiki's refusing to talk to Tombo because they haven't been formally introduced, which Tombo remarks is an old-fashioned way of doing things. But having said that, I don't think it's quite as dominant, the old versus new in this film. But there's also aspects such as Tombo being obsessed with the invention of aviation, and he has friends that drive a car, which is of course representative of modernity. But Kiki, by contrast, keeps with the traditions of being a witch and rides her mother's old broom, which is representative of the old. And by the end of the film, when Kiki's finally replaced her broom with a modern one, she kind of finally embraces Tombo as a friend, and we could argue that this micro-theme concludes by her embracing aspects of the new. But of course that's just sort of conjecture. So, in all, Kiki is an excellent character, and the redub by Disney in 1997 brought the excellent voice talents of Kirsten Dunst into the fold. But for me, the star of the show is Gigi the Cat, who in the Disney release is voiced by the late Phil Hartman, who was sadly murdered shortly after the release of this film. But I think his voice talents contribute to this cat who is already a source of comic relief, but it's just this commentary of perpetual cynicism towards everything Kiki does and everyone she meets that Phil Hartman really kind of brings to life. And Gigi is literally the quintessential scaredy cat, that sees danger in everything. They see the negative in everything, and I find that really quite hilarious, honestly. And again, it's this cause of contrast and character progression, because of course Kiki is optimistic in her demeanour, so the pair work very well together, and their opinions and conversations are somewhat humorous and moving. So one of the moments of genuine sadness in this film is actually when Kiki loses her powers. She loses the ability to converse with Gigi, and so is finally truly alone in this town with nobody to speak to. And the most comical points of the film as well also feature Gigi, most prominently when we see him, posing as this cat doll and getting harassed by a child, and also an elderly dog. So, I think, it's a really good kind of character pairing there, the odd couple dynamic, as they call it. So anyway, to conclude, Kiki's Delivery Service is one of my favourite Studio Ghibli installments, which is, it's quite light on drama, it's quite heavy on the self-contained little moments of sadness and comedy, and as previously mentioned, the trainee witch moving to a new town is a very neat allegory for growing up and a transition into adulthood, or at least adolescence. And each character, no matter how minor, such as the aforementioned baker, have their part to play in the story and how we perceive the development of Kiki. So I'd recommend this film to basically anyone. So if you haven't watched it, I do recommend it, but it's not one of the most harrowing or complex of stories you'll ever have to contend with.